So I've shared my favorite movies, my favorite actors and actresses, even my favorite scores. But today I'm going to give you my top 10 favorite directors of all time. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your favorite directors of all time. As I go into this is not a list of the best directors of all time. It's my favorite directors, the ones who have made the most movies that have meant the most to me. So if you're wondering why one of your favorite directors or one of the greatest directors of all time isn't on this list, just because they're not one of my favorite directors of all time. Also, there is a companion video to this over on my Patreon page with 13 more of my favorite directors. Join at any level over at Patreon and you can unlock that video. The link is down below in the description. And let's get started. Kicking things off is John Woo. Now this might seem like an out of the blue pick for my top 10 because I don't talk about him a whole lot on my channel, but that's because I kind of focus a little bit more on big franchises, and his big franchise movie that he's associated with is Mission Impossible 2, which is the worst of that franchise. But he did a whole bunch of amazing action movies in the 80s and in the 90s that were so influential and formative for me back when I was growing up and falling in love with film. So he kind of really made a name for himself starting back in the mid 80s with A Better Tomorrow. He did a series of these movies with Chow Yun-fat, The Killer, Hard Boiled, that just have the most amazing gunfights that you will ever see. And that's the stuff that influenced Robert Rodriguez, the Wachowskis, that led to more dynamic action gunfight choreography starting in the late 90s into the zeros. And it goes back to what John Woo was doing. Now, people pick on him with the doves and the slow-mo, but when he was in his prime, it was incredible. Add to that when he started to transition into Hollywood, he gave us one of Van Damme's best films with Hard Target, Broken Arrow, very solid 90s action film, and then Face Off is just a fantastic example of what you can do when you get two actors that can go for it in Nicolas Cage and John Travolta playing one another with great John Woo action and a big Hollywood budget. So John Woo is one of these ones I might not talk about a whole lot on my channel, but I absolutely love his films. Number 9 is James Wan. When I was first putting this list together, he wasn't one that immediately came to mind as someone that would crack the top 10, but when I started looking through directors' filmographies, he immediately became one that I realized this guy's got a really solid batting average as a director. Of course, he's an icon of horror over the last 15 years. The Conjuring movies in particular being the standout ones for me, the two that he directed. But he's also done blockbusters that I thought were just great Taco Bell movies, as I call them. I really enjoyed Aquaman, and a lot of that goes back to the way that he shot the action. But then he even has smaller films in there like Death Sentence that if you're like in the mood for like a really dark revenge film that isn't talked about as much, that is one that you've got to go check out. And so he's one of these guys that if his name is attached to it as the director, I trust that I'm going to like the movie. Next up is Robert Zemeckis, one of the icons and legends of the 80s and the 90s, those years that were so formative to me, and he just cranked out classic after classic. Of course, he's the guy behind the Back to the Future trilogy, some of my favorite movies of all time, some of the most rewatchable films of all time. He also directed Forrest Gump, one of the first dramas, one of those first movies was like getting Oscar nominations and wins that me as a little young teenager went to go see in the theater and absolutely loved. You got Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Castaway, another movie that I absolutely love. Not the most rewatchable film, but a movie that I love. One that people don't talk about as much, but was so important to his filmography was Romancing the Stone, which is kind of his take on Indiana Jones with Michael Douglas in the lead. It kind of has more of like a romance novel with an Indiana Jones adventure vibe to it. Put it all together and you've just got a great set of films. Number 7 is Brad Bird. What makes him interesting on this list is he directed both animated as well as live action films and done a great job with both. Going all the way back over 20 years ago, he did Iron Giant, a movie that wasn't a big hit when it came out and everyone seemed to have discovered on home video afterwards. Then he went on to start working with Pixar and did the Incredibles films, which obviously are incredible. He did Ratatouille, and then the one that really put him on the map for me was when he did Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. And I've said this many times before in my videos, but the Dubai Tower sequence in that film, I saw it in the theater in IMAX, and that is the best sequence I have ever seen in a movie theater. And he just absolutely delivered. It was pure his direction, using the IMAX format to full edge of your seat potential, as well as being really funny at the same time. So when they announced that they were doing a new Star Wars movie, Brad Bird was actually my #1 pick to direct Episode 7. Then we have Richard Donner. This is someone that I don't feel gets discussed enough when we're talking about iconic directors, because if you stop to think about it, he's someone that made a major impact on multiple genres spanning several different decades. First off, obviously, he directed the original comic book movie blockbuster in Superman, the movie, that so much of the genre, as we know of it, goes back to what he did with that film.
Superman, the movie, is still to this day the archetype of the perfect superhero film origin story. And we watch it before we make almost any one of our films.
Jump forward a few years, he directed The Goonies, this just iconic family classic film. Then a couple years after that, he did the Lethal Weapon franchise, which most people consider one of, if not the greatest, buddy cop action franchise of all time. Add to that, he also did like Maverick in the 90s, Conspiracy Theory. So this is a guy that's touched on a bunch of different genres, made a massive impact on cinema, and I think more people need to talk about him. In 5th place is John McTiernan. Now this is a director that delivered the 1-2 punch of Predator and Die Hard in back-to-back years. 1987, he puts out Predator, which I've said this before in my videos, but it's one of the very few Arnold Schwarzenegger movies that doesn't feel like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Even though it has all the muscles, machine guns, and one-liners, he had so much control of the film, it feels like a John McTiernan film. Next year, he puts out Die Hard, the movie that I've always said is the best straightforward action movie of all time. He, of course, did Die Hard with a Vengeance, the best Die Hard sequel, and just a great action movie in and of itself. Also in this time frame, he did Hunt for the Red October. So he just delivered this incredible string of great action thrillers in this one decade. Then he got in a little bit of trouble with the law and hasn't been able to direct any movies over the last 15 years or so, which is a real unfortunate thing because he's such a great director. Number 4, Quentin Tarantino, one of the massive directorial forces of the last 30 years, and he did it without having a big major franchise. He did it by telling original stories that paid tribute and homage to all the films that he loved from the past. All of them have his distinct style in the storytelling, the dialogue, the way that he does his characters, but they cover so many different genres, and all of them are love letters to cinema and to fans of cinema. They're different from one another, but they're all so very much the same at the same time. And as he was someone that rose to prominence in the 90s, and I was a teenager in the 90s, like he was one of those directors that as I discovered Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, that's when I started to fall in love with movies beyond just big blockbusters and realize that there is smaller stuff out there that I can get into, and made me love movies more. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to share your picks down below in the comment section. My list is not the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, remember there's a companion video to this over on my Patreon page with 13 more of my favorite directors. So some of your favorites that aren't on this list probably are over on that list. Join at any level and you can unlock that video. In 3rd place is Christopher Nolan. Speaking of directors that made me love cinema, back in the year 2000, I went to this small art house theater and saw this little movie called Memento that I'd heard would blow my mind, and it blew my mind. It was a story that was told backwards, and it got to the final twist and turns. I was like, wow, whoever this guy is, I'm gonna pay attention to what he's doing. And for the last 20 years, he's consistently delivered interesting films in blockbusters that actually kind of challenge the audience, tell original stories, and explore deep themes. Obviously, he's the guy that brought us the Dark Knight trilogy, one of the best trilogies of all time, some of the best comic book movies of all time, but he's also done thrillers. He's just done movies like Inception that just incredibly well-crafted, complex stories, and that's what makes him incredible. And ever since I first discovered Memento, he's made me love movies more and more and more. Our runner-up is James Cameron. Now, this is a director that's done less than 10 films, but that has a whole lot of movies in my top 30 favorite films of all time. Of course, he brought us the Terminator franchise, where the original film was this incredible blend of time travel, action, horror, sci-fi, all into one. And he follows that one up with Terminator 2, one of the greatest sequels of all time, a movie that surpasses the original film that was already fantastic, and that is probably my favorite movie of all time that adds emotion to it. Incredible action, state-of-the-art special effects. Of course, he did the movie Aliens. I actually much prefer Aliens to Alien, and I think that Alien is a fantastic film itself, but just the way that he built on the world of Alien, what he did with the Ripley character, the way that he handled the action, the tension, all of it fantastic. Then he does movies like True Lies, this unbelievable action movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. Even some of his lesser talked about stuff like The Abyss, still this great underwater thriller. And of course, he did that movie called Titanic and Avatar. For me, of his the real James Cameron films, not just kind of his Piranha movie that he did, of his real movies, Avatar is my least favorite of the real James Cameron films. And if that's the weakest of your filmography and it became the highest grossing movie of all time, that is an incredible set of films, and it actually breaks my heart that we lost James Cameron to Pandora over the last 20 years. But coming in first place is Michael Bay. I grew up watching the Transformers cartoons, and his ability to translate them into modern blockbusters with complex storytelling, fascinating, nuanced characters, and blockbuster action just puts a big smile on my face. Just kidding. I don't hate Michael Bay. I actually really like some of his movies. He's just not one of my favorites. But easily coming in at number one is Steven Spielberg. When it came to compiling this list of my favorite directors, almost everything about it was really, really tough, except picking my number one. I always knew he was going to be in first place because he just has so many movies that to me are the best or one of the best of their genre and of a whole bunch of different genres. You've got Jaws, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as Last Crusade, Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, and you could just keep going on and on and on of movies of different genres that are absolutely fantastic. Like for me, something like Minority Report, that is this great sci-fi adventure film, is only mid-tier Steven Spielberg. When you have a movie like that on almost anyone else's filmography would be a top film, and it's just like mid-tier for me, that's a director that has just consistently been putting out fantastic films and has just so much diversity and versatility in what he's able to do and able to do with excellence. Once again, when I look at my top 30 favorite movies of all time, it's just Steven Spielberg movie after Steven Spielberg movie, covering so much ground. So without question, he comes in at number one. Remember, there's a companion video to this over on my Patreon page with 13 more of my favorite directors of all time. You can find that at the link down below. You got a list of my favorite movies right there, favorite actors and actresses right there, and thank you so much for watching.